All right, here we go. Our last lesson or take home lesson of the semester, of the course, really. Topic 12.7, the costs of fascism. The goal here is for you to be able to explain how fascist systems can lead to violence, war, and mass death on a scale that humanity had never seen. The big idea here is that fascism promises order, strength, simple solutions, and when it's fully implemented, it leads to repression, violence, and conflict. And this lesson is going to focus on the consequences of fascist systems. Remember that the Enlightenment emphasized ideas like individual rights, equality under the law, and limits on government power. That we all have rights because we're human, that because we're all human, we all should be treated the same under the law, and that government power should not be unlimited. But fascism rejects these ideas, and instead they emphasize on a strong central leader with unlimited, unchecked power. They have complete control over the media and opposition. Nationalism is used as a tool in their tool chest to gain and keep control. They create an us versus them thinking. We're no longer all human, we are the in group and the out group. And these systems concentrate power and remove limits on government power, allowing, well, abuse of power. So, what happens when power is unchecked? Governments can begin to limit rights and freedoms of individuals. Opposition is silenced or even punished. Laws target specific groups who are deemed as the outgroup, unworthy. Fear and control replace freedom, and laws are used to justify actions against targeted groups. Then there becomes the escalation inside the country. Right? It starts with people beginning to be labeled as enemies of the state, enemies of the government. Propaganda spreads fear and division. Groups are blamed for the problems of society, those outgroups. Things would be great if it weren't for those others who are just taking and destroying everything, you're told. And rights are removed step by step, and violence becomes more accepted. Then, once the scapegoating is seen as a normal part of life, then it leads to persecution. Leaders blame specific groups for all of society's problems, and these groups are labeled as dangerous. The leaders gain support by promising to fix this threat. But once they have that power, well, they have to act on those claims, right? If the threat is as serious as the leader claimed, then people expect action on eliminating that threat. So this leads to laws that target those outgroups. Their rights are removed, they are arrested and imprisoned. And this begins to escalate because leaders have to prove their claims in order to maintain power. Here you can see some examples of the Nuremberg laws, the laws that the Nazis put into place, limiting the citizenship and rights of Jewish people within their country. Once those rights are limited, then dehumanization can begin. These targeted groups are described as less than human, and so there's no more limits on how you can treat them, right? The Enlightenment has this idea that we're all human, we're all the same, we all have these rights. But fascism says there's us and there's them. We are deserving, they are different, they are less than human, and so you can treat them differently. And the Nazis did this. Their scientists would perform horrific experiments on their prisoners, treating them as objects instead of human beings. And this wasn't just done to adults, this was done to men, women, and children. It shows how dehumanization, that is, thinking of humans as less than human, leads to extreme actions. I'm not going to go into the detail of the horrific experiments conducted by the Nazis, but needless to say, it is some of the worst things ever done by humanity. As we saw in class, the Nazi government carried out genocide attempts against targeted groups. Now, genocide is a word that means the intentional and systematic killing or persecution of a large number of people from a particular national or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. So, about 6 million Jewish people were murdered by the Nazis in this movement, is a direct result of fascism gaining control over the German government. You can see here, right, the population of Jewish people, this huge dip that happens because of the Holocaust. But it wasn't just Jewish people who were targeted. Millions of others were also killed for being labeled as part of the outgroup, as not being part of us, but being part of them. The Roma, Gypsies were targeted. The LGBTQ plus community, disabled individuals were among the very first targeted and executed by the government simply for having disabilities. Political opponents were targeted. You can see here the different symbols, right? We're all familiar with the Star of David, that Jewish people were forced to walk around wearing. But what many others don't realize is that there are other symbols: a red triangle for a political criminal, a green triangle for someone who committed some type of crime, homosexuality, being a Jehovah's Witness, being an immigrant. These would all have the badges where they'd have to wear in order to walk around. So everyone knew who they were, so it was clear they weren't part of the us group, they were part of the them group. Total deaths reached millions across Europe, right? 6 million Jewish people, but there are also many, many more people also who were killed for reasons other than being Jewish. These killings were organized by the government. They were carried out in camps and with mass executions. This was systematic, not random violence. It was carried out and planned out by the state in a very meticulous and organized way. And to be clear, these victims, like in previous wars, were not soldiers who were killed in a time of war. They were men, women, and children that fascists just said were enemies of the people and no longer deserved to live. Fascist governments always feel the need to expand. Their ideology emphasizes strength, power, and national superiority. Their expansion is seen as proof of their strength, right? How else can you prove you're strong but other than going out attacking and taking from others, gaining resources from, quote, weaker nations, and uniting your people by saying, look, we're at war. We have to get all band together against our enemies. This is a necessity of fascist governments. Fascists see conflict as necessary. Their leaders use war to increase control over their own people, distract those people from the internal problems inside their country that their fascist government is incapable of solving. And it strengthens national identity by trying to band the in-group together during a time of war, so that expansion leads to large-scale conflict with other nations. Again, this is not just an accidental side effect of fascism, it is a core component of it. World War II is famous for becoming a war of, well, total war. It's a global conflict. Over 70 million people die worldwide. Civilians, not soldiers, become direct targets as cities are bombed and destroyed en masse, and not just by fascist governments, but by the Allied governments as well. War is no longer restricted to battlefields away from major populations. Entire societies are now affected and destroyed by war. And don't get me wrong, this is a whole new level of destruction even before we get to the weapon you all know is coming. Advances in technology have increased the power of war. Weapons become far more destructive than ever before, and entire cities can be destroyed in seconds through mass bombings. These bomber planes dropping these huge explosives that completely decimate, destroy entire cities. These are fleets of bombers that we essentially carpet bomb civilian centers. And when I say we, I'm saying this as an American. Yes, America did this to Dresden in Germany and other cities in Japan as a tactic for trying to bring this war to a close. I'm not trying to create some moral argument for this was good or this was bad, but for you to understand, war is no longer isolated to battlefields away from where women and children and men and civilians all live. It is now, when you're at war, that war can come anywhere and no one is safe. Then there is that weapon that I've been alluding to, the weapon you all knew was coming, the atomic bomb. The U.S. dropped that bomb first on Hiroshima and then on Nagasaki in 1945. Over 100,000 people were killed instantly by this. You can see here people's shadows as they were being vaporized. Their shadows are literally still burned into the cement, the stones in the areas that were close to the epicenter of these blasts. So over 100,000 are killed instantly, but the total death rate rises to over 200,000 due to radiation burns, injuries, and just radiation sickness in general. Cancer rates skyrocket in these areas. And Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they were civilian centers. They were cities with people just going about living their lives. Entire sections of these cities are destroyed, buildings flatten, fires spread rapidly. Survivors suffer from long-term effects from radiation, including, as I said, increased cancer rates. A single weapon can now destroy an entire city in seconds. It's not a fleet of bombers with thousands of, bombs dropping on cities. It is one bomb in one plane. Dresden, Germany, who I alluded to earlier, right? 800 American and British aircraft fly over the city. They drop over 3,900 tons of explosives, right? 800 planes, 3,900 tons of explosives. The kills between 22 and 25,000 people. Hiroshima, Japan, it's one American aircraft. 15,000 tons of explosives on that one plane. 60,000 to 80,000 people die instantly, and 145,000 people die eventually. You see how the scale here and the technology escalates within this one war to something that is unfathomable in just a few decades before. This war is different. Earlier wars required armies and long battles. Industrialization increased the scale of that destruction. Now technology allows instant, massive destruction, entire populations affected all at once. The power of war has changed completely and forever. So let's talk about the bigger story we've been building this entire semester. The humanist movement creates a value of human potential and knowledge that starts to break us away from the old systems. The scientific revolution comes next, with a new understanding of the natural world as we are unlocking the mysteries of nature and truly understanding how everything works. Industrialization gives us the ability to produce things at a massive scale. All these things are making life better in many, many ways. But then they're also used for total war, where entire societies now become involved in conflict, and atomic weapons are created using the very tools of the humanist movement, scientific revolution, industrialization, in order to create destruction at an unprecedented level. The very same progress that advanced society, making life better, also increased the power to destroy, as nuclear weapons, first invented in the United States, spread to Russia, and then China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, Israel, France, the United Kingdom. Nuclear weapons are proliferating around the world. And that's kind of what happens in the next chapter of world history that unfortunately we're not going to get to in this class. What you need to realize is that when powerful ideas and technologies combine with unchecked systems of power, the consequences become far more dangerous. The cost of these systems is not just war, it's destruction on a scale never seen before. So, for the final time, let's do a big picture takeaway. Fascist systems help create global war, and that global war leads to total destruction and mass death. A simple equation here is unchecked government power, division in society, plus modern technology creates a massive human cost. So fascism is dangerous because it removes limits on power. It divides us into us versus them, and it leads to violence, war, and genocide. It's important to know that these fascist systems don't stay controlled. They escalate and become more dangerous. They start small, but they grow. When people trade their freedom for simple solutions and strong leaders, when they trade that freedom for systems that promise order, stability, safety, and prosperity, the systems that promise that order can produce destruction. And that destruction will be on a massive scale like none other seen. Remember that after Napoleon, Europeans at the Congress of Vienna tried to create a system that prevented war so that it wouldn't happen in Europe again. Then after World War I, the League of Nations was created with that same hope. After World War II, we get the United Nations with that same hope. But history, well, it doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme from time to time. And with that, for the last time ever in this class, I want you to write the day's goal, identify those 3 facts you learned, and write one final question for me. I'll see you in class.